Okay, finally. As usual, technical difficulties are the order of the day when it comes to Facebook Live, but it looks like things are working on my end. Today, I'm going to be interviewing author C.J. Brightley, who's not here yet, so I'm going to wait until somebody shows up. All right. Hi, Father Michael. Good to see you. Okay, so today we are chatting with author C.J. Brightley, who's going to be telling you all about herself in a few minutes. Just a few bits of housekeeping beforehand. These next few weeks, I'm going to have several author interviews, so just be aware that they're going to be happening. A really big one is happening. Hi, Cecilia. I'll be inviting you in a second. The big one's coming on next Tuesday, and then there'll be one on next Friday, and the Friday after that. I have a big giveaway to share with you later on in this interview, so make sure you stick around, not just for the beginning. A lot of interesting stuff to give out to one lucky winner at the end of the month. But before we go any further, I'm going to invite our interviewee, and we'll start talking. All right.
Hi.
Excellent. Hello,
Testing,
Cecilia.
testing. Okay.
Can you see me?
Hi, yes.
Good, excellent. All right, so hi, nice to see you.
Hi.
Nice to have you here. Um, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You write as C.J. Brightley, right? Even though your
Yeah,
given name is Cecilia. Yeah.
yes. So I had to have a pen name because when I started publishing, I still worked in government contracting and I
Okay.
needed to separate them. The pen name's never been a secret, but when people look for me in my national security policy role, I don't want them to find dragons.
Yeah, probably a good idea.
So yes, I have an epic fantasy series and a Christian fantasy series. The fourth and final book in my Christian fantasy series is the one that I'm struggling with right now. So it's long and complex and kind of kicking my tail.
All right. Well, we'll talk
um,
about that a little bit later. But I wanted to start you off by asking, what is noblebright and what do you have to do with it?
okay. So some friends and I were talking about like the trends in fantasy, and we're thinking that the the things that we love about fantasy didn't seem to be trending right now. Grimdark and Game of Thrones and just the feel and the almost the theology of
Hmm.
what underpins all of the stories is just so dark and cynical, and we needed a word for the opposite of that that wasn't old fashioned,
Uh-huh.
because that kind of comes with its own baggage,
Yeah.
for some people more than others. Um, but what if it's a new story? What if it feels new and fresh, and yet it's just very anti grimdark in tone? And so we came up with Noblebright. We kind of took it from the gaming world. I'm not a tabletop gamer, but I
Yeah.
like the word. And some of the people that suggested it said, "Yeah, I think it's Noblebright. Noblebright's the right word." Um, so
Okay, so
that's
it's a term that already existed somewhere?
it. Did I think it was on 4D Chan somewhere? I don't think anybody really used it very much,
Okay.
but I think like a Noblebright parody of like Warhammer,
Okay.
whatever game is that I don't play. And it
Okay.
started out as kind of like a tongue in cheek thing. I was
Hmm.
like, well, we can go with that. I mean, it is kind of
Yeah.
lighter in tone. Um,
Okay.
and the stereotype is that it's like fluffy and silly and like
Yep.
rainbows and unicorns all the time.
Hmm.
That's not really how I'm using it, but I guess if you're a Grimdark fan, it might seem that way.
Hmm.
So if you've seen the alignment chart of media with, Star Wars and like Avatar, The Last Airbender, and
Yeah.
Game of Thrones, and it kind of puts all of them in these little boxes. Um,
Okay.
for the noblebright site and kind of how I use noblebright to talk about um, books and literature, I'm using it very broadly. So almost like drawing a line diagonally down that chart and saying
Okay.
everything on that site is grimdark and everything on that site is noblebright, even though
Yeah.
really there are a lot more nuances than that. But I think for reaching readers, it's useful to define it more broadly. And then as authors and fans, you can talk about whether it's grimbright or grimdark or noble
Hmm.
bright or noble dark. I think that's fun, but I don't know that readers are necessarily going to think that. That it. I want it to turn into a search term on Amazon, and so you have to
Okay.
make it simple.
So how is that going? Are people searching for Noble Bright on Amazon?
Some are. I wouldn't say it's a huge number of people, but there definitely are some people finding books that way and authors who are starting to put it in their keywords. And I'm hoping that if enough of us use it as a keyword, then Amazon will actually start putting it as an option, like over on the left, where you can find, Epic and then Noble Bright. And so someday, long-term goals.
That would be nice. That would be nice.
Yeah.
Actually, I think some of my viewers might not even know what Grimdark is. So maybe we want to talk a little bit about what that is and why your work is not that.
Okay. Well, I I have not read as much Grimdark because it turns me off so viscerally. Um,
Mhm.
but everything
So
that I
so
have read,
is it Game of Thrones or is it something worse? Is it something less? What is it exactly?
Game of Thrones is the most popular example. I think it's
Mhm.
written from a very cynical worldview that people are horrible and the world is horrible, and the most you can hope for is to claw your way to the top before someone
Mhm.
stabs you in the back.
Mhm.
And not only is that kind of, it's cynical and hopeless, but it, even if you have a good character in a story like that, the story by its very nature portrays that person or that character as naive and
Mhm.
silly and kind of stupid.
Yeah.
and and that if they make some grand sacrifice that is selfless and noble and
Yeah.
kind and generous, that was just really kind of a dumb thing for them to do, and they deserved what was coming to them for being
Yeah.
dumb.
Right.
And I don't
I
think
mean,
that's how the world is.
yeah,
And
no, it definitely isn't, and I'm not even sure if some grimdark authors would make the argument that the world is like that. But it's for me, what strikes me the most about grimdark, and you can agree with this or not, is this sort of lack of comfort with the possibility of there being somebody with actual um, good uh, good uh, what am I trying to say? It's somebody who's actually doing something good because it's good, not because there's some sort of self-interest involved. It's almost like the
so
authors could consider it to be impossible, or find it too difficult, because it is very difficult, I think, to write a good character nowadays in this world. It's very easy for that kind of character to come off as saccharine, or as goody two shoes, or as, yes, thank you, Kate. It is intentions. This is what I was trying to look. Yes, good intentions. Uh, and rather than trying to do that realistically and in a compelling way, it's easier to go the path of cynicism. I think it's an easy way out.
I agree with that, that
Yeah.
it's hard to write someone with strong principles and not I think kind of almost look down on them, because you're the, as the author, you're the creator, and it's like, oh well, I can make them do whatever I want. But to uphold the character's principles in a way, as the author, that would be very hard if you didn't uphold to those principles yourself.
That's true.
I
Yeah.
think one reason why it's hard for certain people to write noble bright, because they don't really believe in those principles. So
Yeah.
why would they make those characters honestly noble characters? Why would they do that? Because
Yeah.
it's
Well, no, you're absolutely right, and I think part of the challenge perhaps that faces authors on any side of the spectrum is that the world that you see outside of your window, or at least on the television screen as it's presented to you, is one in which it seems like any intention towards goodness is going to be um, subverted, if not by the person doing it, then by somebody else. It's almost like everything is out, like all everybody who's in power is out to do something about any possible good intentions and twist them into something bad. And
Hmm.
it's a difficult reality to deal with because um, it's no longer assumed that a person reading this story is going to understand the intentions of somebody when they want to do something just for being good. And for myself, I don't know if this is true for you as a writer, but for myself, I find myself challenged and I find myself having to write slightly darker stories than perhaps, well, then certainly than my mother or my sister like. uh, because having read Game of Thrones and um, having considered that point of view a kind of challenge, um, it's not enough for me to just whitewash it and say, you know, let's ignore it, it doesn't exist. Let's write something, that's happy clappy. No, it's how do you find virtue and goodness in a world that seems to have none of it? And
Hmm.
I think Noblebright is very good for that sort of thing.
I think so. There's in a very gray and dark world, there isn't such a sharp contrast between virtue and evil, like
Mm,
goodness and evil. And if everything is just shades of evil, like what is there to believe in? Like, why am I even subjecting myself to this? I mean, yes, characters are interesting, but I can't root for anybody. Like, this is awful. Um,
yeah.
and I did find, though, somewhat to my surprise, my epic fantasy series is actually a lot lighter in tone. I mean, it's it's not happy, joyful all the time, but
Yeah.
it is not explicitly Christian. Um,
Hmm.
and so I showed the character's virtue is there isn't such a clear explanation for it, I guess, in the world. Whereas my Christian fantasy, I found that it went much darker, much
Yeah.
faster. And the
Yeah.
contrast between the characters who are extremely noble and extremely good and this horribly dark dystopian world, like that contrast was actually very important.
Hmm.
um, and there are plenty of other characters who are navigating their own shades of gray and their own journeys, but there are a few characters who are just bright shining lights of virtue
Yeah.
in this dark world, and that contrast you just don't get in different kinds of stories.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I have to say that for myself, I did enjoy I enjoyed your epic fantasy, the first one. That's
Are you
sorry,
there?
somebody called me in the middle of this. Oh. Anyway, what was I saying? Yes, I enjoyed your epic fantasy series, but interestingly, you put the excerpt for your Christian fantasy, which I would even maybe even uh, quantify as urban fantasy on some level, although
It
it
is.
doesn't follow many of the tropes. It doesn't have the scantily clad woman in tight leather jeans holding something sharp on the cover, and thank goodness for that. Um, but I don't read urban fantasy. I don't like it at all. It's
Mhm.
not something that appeals to me. But I couldn't put was it a long forgotten song down. It got me from the
Oh,
very first second. Yeah, and I didn't expect it to. I was like, oh, I'll just give it a shot, and I had to buy it and had to keep reading it. Um, sorry.
well, thanks.
But so my question then about that particular series, and I'll put this in a bit of context for people who haven't read it. It imagines a dystopian world in the near future where America is no longer America, and there's some sort of empire kind of thing going on, and the characters have forgotten about the existence of America. They've forgotten about the existence of a democracy before. They've been sort of either reprogrammed or they've forgotten or something's happened, and everything's quite depressing. It's a good dystopia in that sense. And then suddenly there are these fae that appear out of nowhere, and there are these underground scary creatures that they attack with swords and things, and it gets bloody very quickly. And there are hints of vampires and things that I would never read in my life, and yet I find myself just gobbling this thing up. And so my question to you is, why did you choose um, to do this specifically in the Christian fiction genre? Because, and I'm going to be a bit critical here, not of you, but of the Christian
Right.
fiction genre in general.
Mhm.
Um, Personally, for myself, I find it to be generally not inspiring. I find that there's a lot of preaching to the choir going on in
Mhm.
Christian fiction, and in a context nowadays when, for better or for worse, Christians are finding themselves more and more on the defensive. For myself, I find it more useful to avoid the label, even if
Mhm.
my world can't help coming out in my writing, as it necessarily will, right? So it was kind of a brave choice for you to go that way, especially
Mhm.
considering that you have this noblebright site and that you're doing something a bit more general. So why was it that you
Mhm.
chose that particular genre?
Um, well, I don't know that it was really a conscious choice. I wrote, I I wrote, started Things Unseen, the first book in the series, as I was actually stuck in the middle of Honor's Heir, the third book in the other series for those
Yeah,
who haven't read it. Um, and I was really stuck with Honor's Heir, and
I hate when
wrote
that
the first
happens.
I wrote the first scene of Things Unseen because it was ooh shiny, and I got to the end of it, and if you remember, it was Owen comes in to the bookstore and threatens Dandra, and then he leaves, and I got to the end of the scene and was like, what in the world is happening? Who are these characters? Who is he? Who's Petro? He's threat. I was so confused. I had no idea. And so it was new and shiny, and I ran with it. And I ended up throwing away 50,000 words of Honor's Air
Wow, that's
because I
half
was
a
going,
novel, everybody. That's half a novel
yeah,
at least.
yes. And I don't write long, so that was like two-thirds of a novel for me.
Wow, my goodness.
I was going in just the wrong direction.
Mhm.
And so it was the new shiny distraction while I was making that awfully, horribly painful decision. um, and the two books actually came out within 2 weeks of each other.
Oh wow, okay.
I was trying to get them both out before my son was born. So they came out 3 weeks and 2 weeks before delivery, which was exciting.
Wow.
Um, and so I was writing the Long Forgotten Song series pretty much straight through, and it's the pace has kind of slowed down a lot as I'm struggling. For 3 books, it gets progressively more complex, like fractally, and then book 4 has to pull it all together. And I have the
Okay.
ideas, but making it actually happen is challenging.
Yes.
But it actually, I started that series well before I was really even thinking of Noblebright as a concept.
Okay.
So so it wasn't so much a brave choice in that I went Christian fiction per se. It was
Right.
that story started out a complete mystery to me and turned into Christian fiction. And then I realized I need a word for things like the King's Sword that
Right.
are old fashioned in a way, but also new ish. Um, and how do we how do we describe it in a way that people who are looking for that can actually find it? Because I was looking for books like that
Yeah.
even before I was a writer. And how do you even describe them? I
Yeah.
want a fantasy book that doesn't make me feel dirty and sad. Like they're out
Yeah.
there. There are
Yeah.
plenty of them, but how
Yeah.
do you find them? It's pretty much all individual title recommendations. There was no genre word or subgenre.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Honestly, I hope that Noble Bright catches on. Um, so Yeah, let me open up a question. I actually have a lot of questions that I haven't even started touching yet because we're having such a great conversation here. But before we get to the really exciting part, which is Phoenix Crate, which by the way,
Mhm.
when I found out about Phoenix Crate, I almost started screaming out loud. I thought it was so cool. And and
Fantastic.
and my second thought was, why didn't I think of that first? So,
Well,
but
there's a
before
lot of
we
work
get there,
involved. You made me
well,
glad you're
I
not the
can
one.
imagine. I can imagine. Before we get that, I want
Mhm.
to just ask you a few more questions about your process and about you as a writer and things like that, if you don't mind. What is the? These are questions that I ask everybody, and some people react very badly to them. So
Oh,
I apologize in advance. uh, by the way, for my viewers, I don't give these questions in advance to the authors just so they can sweat. So because it's always fun to watch authors sweat.
oh.
So, uh, Dr. Jenkins, thanks for coming on. Cecilia uses the author name C.J. Brightley, so you can find that author name anywhere. But anyway, what are you reading right now, and
Uh,
why?
and why? Okay. I am reading J.C. Kong's
Yeah.
Songs of Insurrection. Um, I am anxiously awaiting the um, draft that I'm going to get to beta read from Wendy Gengel of the second book in her The City Between series, I think is the series name. The
I haven't
first
heard of it.
book is Between Jobs, and hint, hint, it will be in a Phoenix Crate in the future.
Ah, okay, very good.
I reviewed a lot of her earlier books on my website and on noblebright.org. Um,
Uh-huh.
I what am I reading? You know what? I have to look on my Kindle.
That's okay. That's
I
okay.
forget
So
titles because I'm just like
yeah,
scrolling through really fast.
it's also because we read using e-readers, and
Yes,
that's not conducive
ebooks, so I
not
don't see
conducive
the
to
stuff.
writing. Uh, So do you find yourself reading mostly independent authors or trad published authors, or a mix of both, or is it whatever comes to you?
It's a mix. I think lately it's been a lot of indies because I realized I was collecting a lot of ebooks. It was like, oh, I need to read that one. Oh, I need to
Yeah.
read that one. And then I realized that I had like untold numbers in my
Yeah.
currently reading
Hmm.
stack.
Yeah.
On your Kindle, you make your collections and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you can't find them anymore. You can't
Yep.
find a particular book, so then you make another one. It's like
Yeah.
these are the books I'm really reading.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, I'm reading a lot of indies right now. They're um, almost entirely fantasy, not completely, but um, I've been doing research reading.
Ah,
So.
very good. Uh, do you remember what the first book was that made you cry?
Probably A Tale of Two Cities,
Okay,
which
very
I
good.
read in, I think, fifth grade.
Oh wow.
Um, yes. So my dad let me watch the movie first so that I would be able to follow along better, which was probably a good decision. When I reread it later, I was like, oh, I get it.
Yeah,
But in fifth grade, I would have gotten lost in a lot of the
yeah.
Dickens
Love the
diversions.
long sentences, sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Uh,
So,
Does writing energize you or does it exhaust you?
yes.
Yes.
My my process is exhausting. I keep thinking that when I'm a real writer, I'll have a better process. But with with every book, my process gets more ridiculous and exhausting, and like I have a panic attack in the middle of every book where I don't know what I'm doing. It's completely nonlinear.
Yeah.
The King's Sword was my first book, and it is the only one that I ever outlined.
Oh wow.
So everything else, my most recent um, novel was a standalone. This one,
Okay.
Lord of Dreams, and so it's the story itself is somewhat nonlinear. One of the characters is kind of in and out of time, not quite to the extent of Petro, but
Yeah.
um, the dream sequences take place in kind of different things. And I wrote the entire thing out of order.
Oh
And
wow.
it literally, like, because that's how it comes to me. I write a scene here, and I write a scene here, and I write a scene here, and the character development makes sense once I put them in order. But I
Wow.
don't know what the order is until I get three-quarters of the way done.
Wow, wow,
So yeah, it's actually getting less logical the more I write.
wow. I tried doing that with my first two novels, and it got so overwhelmingly bad that I was throwing out huge chunks of the novel. I realized that I really need a frame around my brain, otherwise it just doesn't work. So I can't do
But
without outlining.
I I I wish I could outline. Like the King's Sword, like it made so much sense. I outlined it, and then I wrote the story, and then it was a little different because I thought Khan was the main character and he really wasn't. But it
Yeah.
more or less followed what I had planned. And yeah, I can't do that anymore.
That's great. That's
So
great.
the, but
Um,
you as an author, you also have, aspiring younger writers who want to write a book, and they're like, how can I do what you do? I'm like,
yeah.
I got nothing. Don't do what I do.
Don't do what I do. Yeah. You should probably tell them to outline. At least in the beginning. Um,
Yes.
was there ever an early experience that you had where you really learned that stories had power?
Um, any particular kind of power?
The power to change people's outlook on
I
life, I think, is what I'm getting at. Not actual like magic.
mean, um, I don't, not like one big experience.
Mhm.
I think I knew that very early on because my parents encouraged reading very early, and I was able to read more or less anything that I allowed to read, more or less anything that I wanted to, with a few limitations on
Mhm.
content when I was very young. But there was never a point where it was, I felt limited in a certain area, and then I was introduced to that topic in a book and realized, like, oh, I don't have to be limited in that way.
Yeah, no, it's a good answer because I like to ask this question because you get all kinds of different answers, but fewer and fewer people nowadays say what you said, which would require a childhood of lots of reading,
Mm-hmm.
which is happening less and less nowadays, and it's kind of sad. On the other hand, um, even if people don't read all the time, I still think stories can have that incredible effect on somebody. Just they just need to find the right one, right?
I think
Um,
so.
yeah. So, what do you want your reader to do as soon as they finished one of your books?
Go find the next one.
Good
I want
answer.
I want them to feel like they can be braver than they were yesterday. That
Okay.
they can be more kind than they were
Mhm.
yesterday.
Which is a kind of
Um,
bravery these days, I think.
yeah, that they feel not as afraid to be vulnerable or um, be generous. Like I want to encourage those things, not in a way that I'm preaching to people, but in a way that gives them that choice, that those things are not silly or juvenile, that you can be virtuous, and it is a
Mhm.
brave thing,
Yeah.
and kind of empower people to go out and actually be noble bright rather than
Yeah.
just read about it.
Yeah. Well, luckily, people do tend to. I mean, it helps that when you read novels, you're actually being put
Mm-hmm.
the metaphorical feet of of the people who you're reading. So you should so hopefully that'll have an actual real effect on people.
Yep.
Um, when Now for myself, and this might be a bit of a challenging question, and I don't mean this. I'm actually very interested in your answer. Considering the fact that Christians are on the defensive very often, um, and I'll be honest with you here. When I started reading book two of the Long Forgotten Song, I was a bit thrown
Mm-hmm.
because book
Yeah.
one. because book one only hinted at the presence of Christianity. There was just that
Hmm.
little mention of the cross. And in book two, you get heavy with the theology, and it happens in chapter two.
It's very,
And
very fast.
yeah, did you do that on purpose? And what's your intention? Sorry, that's kind of a challenge.
Mhm.
That's kind of an attack question. I'm sorry. Um,
That's okay.
who are you writing to when you do that? Are you hoping to convince people of something, or are you more writing towards people who are already Christian?
Um, Almost evenly,
Mm,
both. I wrote the story really as it came to me, and
mm,
I don't want to sound too weird here, but I really feel that it was inspired, not in
mm,
the sense of like I'm writing something on par with scripture, but
yeah.
this was art. This was a story that was given to me in this way, and then
Mm,
I executed as best as I could.
mm,
Um, but I don't think it would have made sense to have that theological discussion earlier in the
no, no,
story.
you're right. It wouldn't have. Yeah.
Um, but then, so I put it as early as I could in the Dragon's Tongue, partly because I wanted people to be able to see it in the Amazon preview.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Okay. Okay.
so if they're checking out the next one, but I did have it. I have it shelved as Christian fantasy on
Hmm.
Amazon, but I was also invited to have Things Unseen in a box set of mythical creatures in the modern world.
Okay. Interesting.
It
Right.
is the only Christian book in
Yeah.
that box set.
Okay.
And the organizer is a friend of mine. We only online. She's not a Christian. She's very nice. And I was just like, if you just heads up, this is a Christian book and it's the only one. And do you have a problem with that? The fact that the, the the theology came out in book two got the box set its first and I think only 1-star review
Oh
for the
wow.
for the second book, which isn't even in the box set
Right.
because
Right.
a few people did feel unhappy with that
Yeah.
surprise.
Yeah.
Um, I do think I telegraphed it as well as I could. This is Christian fantasy. It was not meant to like surprise people.
Yeah.
But as a Christian, you'll see those signs much earlier than a non-Christian might. Um,
Yeah.
and I kind of accepted that. It's like I am going to get some bad reviews from people who are very unhappy with the fact that they have inadvertently liked a Christian story. Um, but maybe they'll be intrigued enough to read on. Maybe I will. Maybe it will make sense to them in a way that a happier, fluffier story wouldn't.
Yeah.
Um, and that was part of it. Is that, like you said, a lot of Christian fiction in general is very happy and fluffy and watered down.
Yeah.
And how do you, if you're living in the world and not in a happy little Christian bubble, that the stories are not going to speak to you. They're not going to be compelling.
Yeah.
And grace like that is not, that's not compelling.
No.
I'm not drawn to that watered down kind of
Yeah. No.
story.
No. It's like it just panders to an existing ideological preconception. I think it's not challenging. It's not interesting, and
Hmm.
uh, it's I mean I still have to applaud you for your bravery because and Dr. Jenkins is complaining that we're giving away spoilers here. I'm not, but but one of the and I think it's okay to say that one of the big sort of linchpins of the entire plot is whether or not the Fae are savable, and the way you
Hmm.
have that set up is very interesting. It's very I find it very challenging for myself because on some level it requires a very specific understanding of the meaning of grace, and
Hmm.
uh, and it could turn some people off. And yet, I will say that I was impressed by at least one of your reviewers on book two who gave you a very like a 5-star review, I think, and mentioned that he's
Hmm.
an atheist and he's and
Hmm.
and it didn't bother him. So you're doing something right.
Thanks.
Well, let's talk about Phoenix Crate. What is it, and why am I so excited about it?
So, if you're in the young adult fantasy world, you would have heard of Owl Crate, which is the the biggest name book subscription box. So every month you get a book and some thematically related bookish goodies of some sort. Um, I want to do something like that, but better because it's noblebright.
Yeah.
Um, we meaning me and my ever so patient husband,
Mm-hmm.
um, are starting Phoenix Crate. It's the same idea, except that it's quarterly rather than monthly,
Yeah.
because I still want time
For
to
your
write.
sanity. Yes.
Yes, for my sanity. Um, we are more focused on independent books, independently published and small press books than the big name traditional publishers. We're exclusively focused on noblebright, so you're not going to get a lot of the young adult books right now are very dark and I
Yeah.
would say inappropriate for young adult readers.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, so we do want the books are not explicit. The Phoenix Crate books are not young adult per se. Some
Hmm.
of them will be classified as young adult, but I'm not making another young adult fantasy box. It's
Yeah.
noble bright fantasy that is clean enough for younger readers,
Hmm.
but amazing books that adults will enjoy, even if you're not normally a young adult fantasy fan.
Hmm.
So our first book is Dragon Friend by Mark Satya. That probably looks backwards to you.
It does, yeah.
Well, it's awesome. Pretend it's right. It's the right way.
There's a
It
dragon. I
won
think it's enough.
it won several awards. The Independent Publishers something that it IPBA award and also
Okay.
another award. I really enjoyed it. Mark Secchia is an amazing author. The setting is this incredibly well built world of like craggy mountaintops above mist, and there are a bunch of different species of dragons. And I think on Amazon it's classified as like coming of age and young
Hmm.
adult, but really it's epic fantasy. This is epic fantasy that happens to be really clean.
Okay.
Um, so I wouldn't say it's a book necessarily only for, 13 to 15-year-old girls.
Yeah. Yeah, sure,
It's a
sure.
book it's a book with dragons that happens to have a young character.
Sure.
So it's amazing. And then here's my super secret sneak preview that we just got today.
Oh my
This is
goodness.
a bar of soap.
That's
Look
amazing.
at that. So,
Wow.
oops.
And there goes the secret. Oh wow. Fantastic.
So it is officially on Instagram now. So
Okay,
I
see?
guess
Okay.
not the first glimpse of it, but I am incredibly excited about this.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Um, so yes, we're shipping quarterly. Orders for the September box are open through the month of August.
So
I've
and
committed.
the site is phoenixcrate.com, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna put that in the comment section for anybody who's interested.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, I've committed to a certain number of boxes, so I've already bought all the stuff for a certain number. If
Okay.
we sell out, um, I'm depending on what the demand is, we may be able to reorder some of those, or we may just have to order more of the December box.
Hmm.
Um, that theme has not been revealed yet, but
Okay.
it will be awesome and you'll love it. It's really fun. Um, we're also going to have special boxes every now and then, partly depending on how much time I have, what the demand is. We want I want to have a lot of boxes because I'm really excited about featuring
Yeah.
a lot of books.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I also want to space it out so that it's not overwhelming.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
this will be in a future box.
Oh, I'm actually
The
going to talk to her in a few weeks. So,
This is amazing, and you will love it if you haven't read it yet. Um,
yeah, it's
I
pretty good.
haven't
Yeah,
decided when that will be, but it will be a featured book at some point.
very good.
Um, so yeah, that's Phoenix Crate.
Awesome. And you've been very, very kind to offer one lucky winner
Yes.
a box.
Hmm.
So that's how that's going to happen is I actually have, and this is for everybody here listening, I've just put into the comment section a link to a giveaway. So this is this month's giveaway. I do these occasionally. If you guys watched me before, you know that I've done these before. But there are actually no, three books and one crate that are being given out this month. One of which is the Phoenix Crate. There's a few others that you may not have heard of, and the big draw is a new novel by Miles Cameron, who's a big trad published author, and that's sort of the draw that I'm trying to get more and more people to. So make sure you check out that link. The sign up is easy, and at the end of the month, I'll let one lucky person know who got
Hmm.
everything. So I'm not going to be dividing the books amongst people. Everybody gets one. There's only one person that will get everything. So
Oh wow,
yeah, yeah,
that's exciting.
yep. Okay, so this has been great. We've been talking for almost an hour. I don't know if you noticed, but um, thanks so much for coming out. Any final thoughts? Where can people find you online, and what do you want to leave people with?
Well, my website is cjbrightly with an ey.com. You can also find me at noblebright.org. We do book reviews. If anybody wants to write a book review for noblebright.org, let me know. Um, and phoenixcrate.com. So
Excellent,
that's it.
fantastic, awesome, Cecilia.
Great.
Thanks so much for coming out and chatting.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Okay, okay, bye bye.
Bye bye.